In this game, we don't run from it. We don't avoid the conversation.
Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy.
There are struggles that have shaped our history. A history that has said, you can't play here with us. Victories may lead us to believe that we have overcome, that we don't need to talk about it, but we do.
That's what we're gonna do, you heard it.
In many ways, these courts, these fields have been a way to discuss more than just wins and losses.
There's a new home run champion of all time, and it's Henry Aaron.
So here on King 5, in a special presentation of race and sports, we'll nod to our past and embrace a real discussion of our present, of our future. I'm Jenna Hanchard. I'm a reporter here at King 5. And this past fall, we started a conversation with the community about race and sports. We had 3 separate conversations right here in our lobby. The first with high school coaches from the Seattle area, the second with former athletes, and the third with sports fans. Over the next hour, you'll hear from all of them. You'll also get some gems from Wazoo professor David Leonard. The hope is that you'll get a range of different perspectives. So let's get into it. Here's episode 1. Thank you, Neil.
Listen to me, nah.
What kind of dip is that?
And celery.
You know, I don't eat everybody's food, just being honest. You know how you go to the cookout and you look and you be like, you know, that ain't mama's. I ain't doing that. I don't eat everybody's food. It's not personal. It's just I don't eat everybody's food.
You gonna take a little bit? Serena, U.S. Open.
They did her absolutely dirty. Men, you know, come at the refs pretty hard all the time, but you would never see them give that type of, like, take points away from a match.
To have to go through that experience, but then be bigger than the experience,
Yep.
Thank God for Serena.
In my opinion, the best refs are the ones you don't see.
Right.
So true.
Those are the best refs. Because,
So true.
you know, and you know, when that ref did that, he's trying to be the center of attention, not, I mean, really, a good official would have said, Ms. Williams, that's a warning, enough, let's play. Right. And just leave it at that.
Well, I think sometimes when we talk about race and sports, we talk about it just in the lens of kind of a Kaepernick kneeling or just in the lens of a Serena, but we don't talk about it on this level.
When I think about sports, like, and I think I coached at an inner city school. Cleveland is obviously predominantly African American, you know, mixed with a few Asian girls. And, you know, I reflect back on games that we played against, let's say, a Seattle Prep or a Holy Names, and you're looking at the foul count, and Cleveland has, you know, 15 fouls in the first quarter, and the other team has 3, and you stop to ask the referee, like, hey, you know, what are my girls doing? How do I make the adjustment? Your girls are the aggressor. So I remember the first time I heard that, I was thinking, like, dang, I got a whole bunch of inner city kids, some African American girls, and this is how you view my players, as aggressors. Like, this is a basketball game. How would you even use that term, aggressor? Like, I was so offended.
What, you think you were able to use that as a life lesson for them?
Oh, life lesson, motivation. Because, you know, the thing is like, I try to tell my players that the sport, this is just preparing you for life.
Race matters. It matters in everything, and if we say it doesn't, you're either naive or you're ignorant. But I think it's a double negative when you're a man of color. You know, you don't have to be a black man, but you could be a minority, or, you know, you could be someone of, not saying prestige, but someone of status. They always try to bring you down, always. So when we won and we were successful, we were cheaters. That's how they tried to knock our success, by putting the cheat line with us. It's the perspective of how they try to minimize your success. If I was a white guy that had the same amount of success and had the same amount of accomplishments, I'd probably be mayor by now. But Jamie's saying is so spot on, because we have to have those conversations. But the problem is we have to have those conversations when we go to certain schools. You know, we have to have those conversations with our kids when they deal with law enforcement. The problem is we have to have those conversations.
I have had officials, you know, I've had an official say to me before, like, you ain't buying us tonight. You know, so, you know, yeah, right. So it's the other side, right? Exactly. It's like, it's the other side, you know, so it's like, it's, you know, so, and maybe that's just his way of saying, like, hey, I'm taking care of my people, right? As I listen to Joey and Jamie talk, like we deal with the same. Like, I mean, I'm on a field, you know, and our situation is the ref telling me that we got the spoiled, entitled kid that just needs to toughen up and play the game, right? You know, so it's and so there is another side to it.
You know, you said you had some, you know, you have some black teens on your team and you have different ethnic groups. So how do you deal with the race conversation, being a Caucasian male, dealing with the state of our country? How do you go about having that conversation?
Yeah, so I guess I would flip it on you right away and I'd say, like, what does that look like for the Caucasian boy that sits on your team?
When we talk about the social injustices of what's going on in society, you don't see that Caucasian young male being killed. You know, you don't see them in the same situation.
What does it feel like that boy to sit in that locker room as the minority?
I mean, I guess, because I don't want to equate those as equal because they're not equal, and so I know that you were responding to that as if it was the other side, and those aren't equal, especially within society, right? And the path of that kid of color in the locker room is going to be very different than the path of the white kid, and so I guess to your point, in answering that question, what is that conversation that you are having with that kid of color? And are you aware of those societal differences?
I think I do a great job in relating with all of our kids, regardless of race, right? But if I'm not intentional about putting somebody, partnering somebody with our kids on a day-to-day basis, that they can look at one another and identify with one another simply by their race in common, then I'm foolish in the way that we assemble our staff.
I'm always trying to have intentional conversations with all the different kids on my team, so I get a chance to learn more about their culture, and that's why I think these conversations are so important to have, because you don't know what you don't know until you have a chance to talk and learn it.
The education for me has been, you know, I've had such a hard time going like, well, where does racism, where does it exist? Because it's not present in my life, right? You know, and so it's been hard over the last couple of years because I don't, in my bubble, in my sphere that I operate in, there is no racism, right? But we're battling it all the time.
I wanted to go back to something you said, Jamie, which was when you were saying that when you grew up, it was like, here's the hoop, here's the ball, that's it. I wanted to talk about equity in sports, and especially within youth sports. What are the disparities that you all see within the youth sports world when it comes to equity in sports?
Say I coached at Cleveland, you know, most of the kids are from the inner city. Most of them come from single parent family homes, so they don't have the means sometimes for, you know, for a meal. They don't sometimes have a way even get to school, fresh clothes. So like as a coach, you're not playing only a role as a coach, you're like a mother figure, like you're the mentor, like you're making sure that they have everything that they need to succeed.
Jamie hit it on the head. You know, in the inner city, we struggle just for the bare necessities. You know, the pregame meals, shoes, you know, you are a mentor, you know, you are that crazy auntie or uncle, or, you know, a father or mother figure. You know, just to do the bare necessities to get your kids to practice is a huge thing.
I have a unique situation because I came from Mercer Island and now I'm in Kent, and they're like polar opposites. And so I know exactly what they're talking about. Now if I go back 2 years, I would be like, what are you guys talking about? Because at Mercer Island, I need this, okay, got it. I need this, got it. I need this. You know, I had parents like, oh, you need how much? Okay, here's $5,000 check. And they would just help me out with whatever we needed, you know, with different things. Or, oh, these kids need this, or here's you know.
Let's be nice.
And that's you know, that's Mercer Island. But now I'm at Kent, and you know, I think my first year there, I knew it was gonna be different, but you know, everything they just talked about of like, I'm going through that same thing, like how do I fundraise? I never heard these stories at Mercer Island because everyone at Mercer Island has 2 parents and do well and here, but then I go to Kent and it's like, okay, I have one mom and she's working 3 jobs, so I never see her, and I have to go home and babysit, so I can't get to practice today because I gotta pick up my 2 little brothers from elementary. Then I gotta make sure I meet my sister from middle school and make sure they're safe. And So it's just a totally different environment I'm in, and so to see that, it's, I would definitely say it's more, like I said, it's just economic based.
But this is what they've been doing in the private school sector or in the well-to-do sector for a while. This is what they're doing on the east side. The sport's driven by money. How do you go to 7-on-7s? It's $500 a pop. It's $250 a pop. If you don't have a budget, you can't do it. So if Coach Maul and Coach Ogata and everyone else are doing these 7-on-7s and these lineman camps and these clinics, and I don't have the budget for it now, I'm behind. Now my kids don't have the same opportunity to get better. So why is it that economics are driving the program's success? If you just look at it and you look at the schools on the east side, a lot of them are successful. It's not that they have better coaching or they have better stuff, but they just have more access.
Like Coach was saying about the disparities between the schools, that is a big, when a kid's able to get private coaching, that, it makes a huge difference. And they're able to get, nicer uniforms, nicer things, and all this other, little perks, and like the meals before games and all those things. I mean, that makes a huge difference in terms of how kids can perform. And, like most of the time we had a nutritionist that would come in and work with the kids on, with each kid to make sure they were eating, and that, that doesn't happen at, where I'm at now. It can't, but those are just kind of the differences, is where money could help a lot.
I would love to be able to switch roles with a private school coach, just for 1 year. I would love it, is because if they could just experience what we go through, from fundraising, from how you have to network, from doing the bare necessities to not having a sports budget, figuring out how you're going to go to Jervis camp, how you're going to raise that $12,000.
And the reality is, like, I'd love to wear his shoes for a month or a season as well, right? Because there's, there are, and I think, well, I think what's real is there's times where I could look at his sidelines and go, man, there's some kids over there, right? And there's times where he could look at our sidelines and say, there's other things over there, right? And so the reality is, we're all battling something.
We should do this as coaches,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying, and have that open dialogue, because even though, we compete, but we're all going through something similar in some shape, form, or fashion, and I can learn from your experience, and hopefully you can learn from mine, and so forth and so on.
Yeah, definitely the key is having the conversation. That's
Absolutely.
the hardest part, and being open to having the dialogue, and then also being open to the biases that you may have or that you may not see, because sometimes people don't believe that they have any biases, or they don't see race, or they don't see color. But really, like I say, when you open up to have the conversation, you're like, oh, well, hey, that's a different perspective. Well, maybe I wasn't thinking the right way in this situation. So
That's why I think what we all do is so special.
Yeah.
Right? Because we have the ability on our teams to do this grunt work, to do the work in our locker rooms. I think we talk about, like, do we want our country to change? Do we want these things to improve? I think we all do, right? And we have the ability to impact the locker room one at a time.
All right, y'all.
Yeah.
We gotta go.
Thank you very much.
We got to go.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yep.
If we look at our high schools and we look at what sports are available at our high schools, that reflects political decisions. That reflects the ongoing histories of housing discrimination. That reflects which school districts are being funded. And those decisions have consequences that we need to have critical conversations about race, so that we can have conversations about inequality and develop programs that rectify these inequities inside and outside of sport.
Coming up after the break, we'll be sitting down with former athletes. We're talking about the pressures to just shut up and play.
And I've had people tell me, oh, what do you know about that? Like, your dad played in the NBA. I'm like, okay, my dad played in the NBA. I'm sitting in the living room with my mother that went to jail at 13 years old for my rights. And because he had a little measly NBA contract, I'm not a part of the generations of struggle that my family has been through.
I saw the plates, I was like, wow, that's
There's actual food coming.
Is it gluten free?
What about the carrot?
Oh yeah, I can have a carrot. That's not gluten.
Is it gluten free?
No, No, we ain't got no
What?
free. Everything costs.
No, we don't have any glue either, so.
Is there extra pressure, you think, for athletes of color that, you know, if you made it, you should just kind of shut up and play and you shouldn't complain?
People have this, I think, around sports, it's like you ascend to a certain level, right? And then it's like, oh, everything is good. You know, we got 70,000 people cheering for you or booing you or whatever. Like everything else before that is, you know, and then everything after should be a certain way too. Like, and it's not that way at all. And I've had people tell me, oh, that, like, what do you know about that? Like, your dad played in the NBA. I'm like, okay, my dad played in the NBA. I'm sitting in the living room with my mother that went to jail at 13 years old for my rights. And because he had a little measly NBA contract, I'm not a part of the generations of struggle that my family has been through. But that's an attitude that's like, oh, you made $1 million, like you've arrived, and the PTSD and all of the things that happen from the traumatic situations in your community and oftentimes at hands of the United States government, that's gone because you got an NFL contract.
I always felt like anytime I walked into a room, I wanted to be the smartest person in the room. But it wasn't cool to be smart and have other thoughts around other things when you're a professional athlete. And so, you know, if you did venture out into something, like they would be, even the team would be like, oh, like maybe he's not dedicated to football, so maybe we should, you know, it's like, oh, because I'm exercising this other part of my brain means that I'm not, you know, still invested in what I'm doing here. And so then that kind of mentality kind of like dumbs you down a little bit.
And you think that for athletes of color, that's in particularly tough?
I think it's I think it's for both.
Yeah.
But because of the things that some of the African American players are interested in, then it becomes a problem because they're the protests and what you're protesting for. And then, like Donald said, it's like, well, how can you complain? Like, you've made all this money. It's like, well, then what am I supposed to do? To just stop caring about everyone else or not think about the feelings? You know,
isn't it both though, right? Because there's pressure on one side. You have people. I mean, everybody hears that, like, just be quiet and play, right? I mean, you hear that a lot in society. But then there's also pressure, like, hey, you have a platform, right? So you need to, you know, stand up for issues and things like that. So you get guys to that level, and you've got kind of a group of people telling you, hey, we don't want to hear it, and you have another group of people who are really expecting you to kind of lead, and so you're in that zone. That's, you know, that's got to be tough to deal with.
It's easy to tell people how to voice, how to protest, when you're always the one being heard. It's easy to be like, this isn't the appropriate place when you're being heard, no matter the place. When athletes are told, well, you only matter when you're scoring touchdowns, what sort of message does that send? It sends a message in terms of who's valued and where black men and women are valued. And if it's only on the field and only when performing and only when succeeding and only when winning, well, is that true value?
You know, I played in the 90s and, you know, at University of Washington. I won't say it wasn't post-racial. I mean, certainly there were white women on the team, black women on the team, Asian women on the team, but, you know, we didn't really have any racial undertones that at least I felt.
At Wazoo, may not have been the same thing. I mean, you're in a small town atmosphere, and I know for me coming out of South Dakota to Colorado, I hadn't experienced much culture, much race. So for me, there was a little bit of ignorance and learning. There was a huge learning curve. I had to learn, and I know that my teammates that were black definitely learned a lot about me, just from the conversations we had, the arguments we had. Pertaining to race.
I would say my history with it is a little different. I don't know how old you guys are, but I'm
younger than you.
Yeah. I just do this high school dunk contest. But you know, I grew up in North Carolina, up in the mountains, and our school was the only, if you want to call it, city school in the area. So we had probably about 30% of our school was African American or people of color. I've gone into stadiums, you know, as a basketball player, and we go in the locker room and they have dudes hanging from nooses, or like, you know, we beat them and there's a sign in the thing that says go home, you know, and so then you have to get on the bus. You're on the bus like ducking down, they're throwing stuff at the bus, you know, all that kind of stuff. And so my perception of it is just a little bit different because I tend to see the race in all of it. But it is just a reflection of what society, you can't have one without the other.
You know, I don't want to, you know, make light and or have anyone think that I don't think there's racial tensions amongst college teams. I think that maybe I should have said, if you're willing to do the work. Maybe my team during my, you know, time, my 4 years, the women that I played with that came before me and came right after, we were all willing to do the work regardless because of that common thread. So we're willing to take that common thread and really weave it into a rich, you know, relationship. If you're not willing to do the work, you will have that experience where you're just lining up and you're just standing next to or practicing with, and then you go on into your other life outside of that locker room. But I feel like hopefully people are really willing to do the work. I mean,
what
because
did that look like, I guess, in your experience for the people that were willing to do the work? How did you all break down those barriers of bias and racism?
I mean, I think, you know, I can remember there was a teammate of mine who we are good friends now. Our kids play against each other. She is not a person of color, and she, you know, said something that was offensive. It just came out of her mouth one day. We were stretching in practice, and she just said it.
What'd she say?
Well, I won't say because then she'll know, and then, you know, everybody will know. But
she gonna know.
You know, she already know. She, you know, she made a comment about the odor that would come from just the black girls on the team, and we were stretching and. Boy, I mean, it was like the scratch the record, and everybody was like, wait, what? Wait, what'd you say? You know, and at that moment, there were, you know, women of color who were clearly offended. I was one of them. There were, you know, white women who were offended. Like, hey, what are you doing? What are you talking about? And we could have at that moment just said, hey, we're good. You know, it took us to both say, I'm not going to cut you out. I'm not going to shut off and just say that's what I think, and we're not going to ostracize her, because really the numbers don't, for a basketball team, the numbers don't support that.
Right.
You know, you're really only as strong as the weakest link on your team.
We all have done and said dumb stuff.
Ooh. Yes.
But when you do and say dumb stuff in an intimate environment, you can work beyond that.
You sure can.
Right? Now you do something dumb, somebody catches it on camera, and you will never live it down.
Yeah, it's over.
And but it's how we grow. You know what I mean? Like, it's how we grow. If she was in the locker room and she said something like that, and the teammate was filming it, and they posted it, she would have had to move out to UW, out the city.
Right.
You know what I mean? And it's like that's unfortunate for our kids.
Yeah.
You know, it's an unfortunate part because you like, I've done dumb stuff.
Well,
and I've had the opportunity to grow.
There's no buffer, right? You had to call, you had to pick up the phone. It took 3 hours at least for it to get outside of, you know, now, it's viral.
It creates a situation where you have a reason to give somebody the benefit of the doubt. You know what I mean? Like, it gives you a purpose, right? It's like, where this guy might say something to me, and if I didn't know him, like, we would have a real issue right now. But we got to go out here and try to get a win. You know what I mean? So we gonna like, hold up, bro. Let's figure this one out. You know what I mean? Like, so we can go do what we have to do. And if in society, if we could take that part from sports, right? If we could take that, like, we have a common goal in humanity to, you know, do. So, like, let's not let this stop us. And then from that, you know, from exposure, from time, you end up growing to love. You know, like, when you're on a team, like, I don't have no teammates that I prefer over any other teammates because of their background. Like, it's just like the kind of person you are that I get down with, or it's the kind of person that you aren't. But we still can get, like, you're still my teammate, right?
The power of sport, though, right? You take a Super Bowl championship, right? There's not too many guys. I don't know if there's been a guy who's going to say, you know what, I'm walking away from this team, walking away from opportunity to win this championship because I don't like this guy, right? That goal is supersedes your bias.
Right.
So you're forced to stay in that situation and work through some of that.
Right.
And whatever the goal may be, it may be a state championship, it may be just different things. So that's the thing that doesn't exist in society. A lot of times we don't have that goal that's going to keep us there to get to know people.
Right. And as a result, you grow as a person.
But do you think that actually changes the person, or does it help them win the championship?
See, that's what I was going to say. Like, you tend to compartmentalize it, right?
Yeah.
Because that's a safety, that's a place of where you can be safe. The locker room gives you that kind of safe space to kind of exercise some things out.
Yeah.
But it doesn't always go from the locker room to the home. You know what I'm saying? So you can have one way that you're operating in the locker room, and then it's a total code switch when you get out. When I walk into a football locker room, like, usually it's separated by position, but it's also separated by race too. You can see the line right down the middle, white, black, and then everyone's just kind of doing a thing. When it's time to play, we come together and we have this one thing that we're fighting for. But I've had to play beside dudes that have told me, like, hey, I don't want my sister to date a black guy, you know, stuff like that. But I have to play right beside this dude. So you get this kind of false sense of acceptance and understanding and security. But like, do they really know what makes you cry? Do they know what color you like?
Can you even cry?
Yeah, exactly. Can you even cry? Like, can you even talk about the trauma? You know what I'm saying? Can they even understand the trauma and how that impacts you and how it makes you who you are? Like, do they really know that? Or do they just know me good enough or well enough to be like, hey, let's go do this. And we'll whatever's between us, don't. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
If sport is going to impact a person in a way that it totally changes them, then they have to also do a lot of work around their perceptions of things outside of sports.
Right. I mean, I guess to your point, it kind of takes work, right? I mean, you were saying you had to put in work to kind of shed some of your biases and build it. What was that like for you?
I have a grandfather from the South, so he had his biases. I have my family in South Dakota, they have their biases, and that's what built me. But I knew a lot of their perspective wasn't right. And so I had to learn and build my own.
Yeah.
And with sports, I had so many people surrounding me that were different and that were confident in who they were, and because of their sport and because of what their upbringing was.
Yeah.
And so it was able to teach me to learn to respect that.
All right, we're gonna wrap up. Any final thoughts you guys have?
Nah.
About race, sports, gender?
For me, it's cool to be here, be in this conversation. Thank you for inviting me. I didn't know I would see friends when I got here. I didn't know who was on the roster. It's really cool that, we've talked about getting together and talking about things for a while. So thanks for bringing us together. Thanks for doing this for the community.
I think it's still a work in progress, and hopefully the next generation of athletes coming, behind us are thinking that the work is worth being done. It's important for the work to be done.
And this is something that I've been wanting to do for a long time, is to have these types of conversations, sports, race, culture, gender, the whole thing. And so I really appreciate being invited and being a part of it.
Y'all want a little more food? Yeah, we just did one.
For some, talking about issues of race and equity isn't easy. They don't know where to start or don't know if they have the right language or tools to have the discussion. Our goal here on Race and Sports was to get different perspectives at the table to start a dialogue. I hope that you learned something in the last hour, and we hope that you'll keep talking at home. I'm Jenna Hanchard. Thanks for watching.